He jumped the fence for a snack. The dragons made him their last meal, a fisherman's fatal mistake, a cave that swallows diverse whole, and a shark alley where poachers vanish without a trace. These forbidden places don't just take life, they erase. Stick around to the end. The final victim's story will leave you breathless. Under the endless azure of an Indonesian sky, Muhammad Anwar made a fatal decision. He was 31, a fisherman by trade, a local by birth, and one of the few brave enough to call Komodo Island his lifelong home. The air that morning smelled of sea brine and sun-baked earth, the same scent that had perfumed his childhood, that clung to the memory of every morning cast in the shadow of legends. But Muhammad's thoughts weren't on myths. They were on sugar apples, tantalizing, sweet, and ripe for the picking, growing just beyond the fence that split his village from the forbidden zone. Everyone knew what lived beyond that fence. Everyone had heard the guttural huffs in the night, seen the shadows that moved with terrifying patience. They called them Komodo dragons, but in truth, they were monsters dressed in reptilian flesh, descendants of ancient horrors that had clawed their way through extinction and survived, hungry. The fence was more of a symbolic boundary than a real one, rusted wires patched with warnings and prayer. On the other side was a territory that locals avoided with the same urgency they avoided the graves of the freshly dead, because both attracted the same thing. Komodo dragons could smell blood from miles away, and their appetite was neither merciful nor forgiving. Muhammad Anwar knew all this. He had been raised on tales of creatures that could dismember a goat in seconds, that swallowed their own kind when meat ran scarce, whose venom did the work that claws did not finish. Yet desire is often blind to danger, and that morning, Muhammad crossed the line etched by generations of fear. Teresa Tawa was hanging her laundry when she saw him vault the fence. Her voice cracked as she called out, but the wind carried it away. She stood frozen, hands damp with linen, watching as Muhammad vanished into the tall grass, his figure becoming a silhouette in the shimmering heat. Then came silence, and the silence birthed terror. The grass began to shift unnaturally, too fast, too synchronized. Teresa screamed. From the underbrush surged two Komodo dragons, summoned by the invisible scent of blood that Muhammad had spilled when he slipped beneath the tree's gnarled roots. They didn't pounce like predators. They advanced like executioners. When the rangers arrived, Muhammad was no longer a man but a memory, his body broken, savaged, lifeless. The dragons were pulled away, but nature had already done what it always did. It reclaimed. Far across the world in the parched isolation of Death Valley, Nevada, a hole in the earth swallowed two young men whole. Paul John Contieri was 19 when he led his brother-in-law David Rose and their friend Bill Alter to the edge of the Devil's Hole. It wasn't just a cave. It was an invitation to darkness, disguised as a puddle in the sand. Jack Alter, only 16, chose to stay behind. He would be the last to see his brother and his friends alive. The signs were clear, literally, plastered on fences and posts, screaming warnings into the dry wind. But signs are ignored when youth wears its arrogance like armor. They descended with oxygen tanks and flashlights, confident in their plan to explore the cave's legendary 325-foot depth. The water was warm, the descent controlled, the surface above still and waiting. Then time passed, too much time. When David and Bill resurfaced without Paul, confusion turned to dread. They dove again, this time desperation replacing curiosity. But when David surged ahead into the abyss, Bill couldn't keep up. The darkness swallowed David too, leaving only one brother on the surface, clinging to the edge of a mystery that had just devoured two lives. Professional diver Jim Hoots arrived under the shroud of night with a singular goal: find the lost. His descent into Devil's Hole was like drifting into the lungs of the earth. The cave did not welcome him, tolerated his presence. At 90 feet, he squeezed through a funnel, entering a chasm so vast it felt like outer space. He found an air pocket Brown's room empty. Further down, at the lower ledge, a dive mask and a single fin gleamed like relics on an altar. Then deeper still, at 325 feet, they found not bodies, but a mystery. A hole small, tight, impossibly deep, sucked water with the force of an unseen ocean. When Jim dropped a weighted line, it fell 932 feet without touching bottom. No diver could go further. The theory, narcosis, disorientation, and the pull of a current strong enough to drag men into a subterranean ocean that science still cannot explain. No bodies were ever found. No answers were ever given. Just two names added to the list of those claimed by a place nature had long since marked forbidden. But perhaps no story bleeds desperation like that of Oluxulwane. Not a place you'll find on a map, but a community in South Africa where poverty has forced men to gamble daily with death. The ocean, cruel and endless, hides within it a currency the black market devours: abalone. These mollusks, prized in China, are rare, illegal to harvest, and guarded not by soldiers but by something worse: great white sharks. The waters between Dyer Island and the shores of Pearly Beach are infamously known as Shark Alley. And to reach the abalone reefs, the men of Oluxulwane must swim through this gauntlet of death. 3 hours out, 3 hours diving, 3 hours back. 9 hours in a deadly zone. On the morning of September 3, 2017, Zalila, 34 years old and newly expecting a child, returned to the water after swearing he was done with poaching. But hunger does not negotiate, nor does fatherhood. So he joined the others, suiting up silently, each man pretending that fear wasn't coiled like a serpent in his chest. As they emerged from the kelp fields, Zalila entered the open water first, spacing himself just as they always did. It was a ritual, a futile attempt to make sense of chaos. Minutes later, when one of the others counted heads, Zalila was gone. Then came the scream. The sea split, and from it burst a great white shark with Zalila in its jaws. The thrashing was monstrous, a blur of teeth and blood. His companions could only watch, their instincts torn between loyalty and survival. They chose to live, swimming frantically back toward the safety of the kelp. One had a waterproofed phone and called a poacher's boat. Not the police, never the police. When they returned to the site, all that remained of Zalila was what the shark had not claimed. Enough for a funeral, but not for closure. Officially, the number of Oluxulwane poachers unalived by sharks in the last 20 years is 5. But among the people who live with the truth, the count is whispered to be far higher, dozens. And still they return, because in Oluxulwane, survival means swimming with death. Each of these places, Komodo Island, Devil's Hole, Shark Alley, exists on the edge of human arrogance and natural wrath. They are not cursed, not in the traditional sense, but they carry a weight, a silence that warns louder than any sign ever could. These are not places one simply visits. They are realms where the price of curiosity, hunger, or desperation is often paid in blood. And yet people go. Mohammed Anwar chased a fruit and met the jaws of a dragon. Paul John Contieri and David Rose pursued depth and found a void no light could pierce. Zalila swam for his unborn child and was devoured in front of his friends. These were not reckless thrill-seekers or delusional adventurers. They were men shaped by desire, by dreams, by necessity. And they were not the first to go where they were told not to, nor will they be the last, because something in us, some quiet voice, whispers not just to fear the forbidden, but to confront it. And so we go, into jungles where dragons roam, into waters that open into the belly of the earth, into oceans where giants swim. We go not because we are brave, but because something older than fear tells us we must. And in that choice, humanity writes its most haunting stories. Now ask yourself, would you have risked it for fruit, for freedom, for family? Why do we defy the warnings etched in blood and legend? Is it ignorance or something deeper? A need to conquer nature, to prove that we can? What do you think drives people into places clearly marked by death? Let us know in the comments. We're listening. And if these stories left you haunted, subscribe. Because next time, the line between legend and tragedy might not be so clear.